We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! Here is the part 5 of What If Naruto Was an Elden Ring. I've found and fought my fair share of gods before. Never been a fan of them. They meddle and mangle everything. Who needs them? It's the strength of your spirit that matters, not them. I don't need any blessings, nor gods, or any of that. Go ahead. Shed no grace on me. I'll still fix this rotten world, one soul at a time. I'll save them all. Just you watch. Narutoxharem. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 12, You Know Nothing. Why did you do it? Beneath the shadows of his helm, Gideon Ofnir felt a faint frown crease his pale face. He didn't deign to look up from the papers strewn atop his desk. Ah, sentiment. Such weakness. He should have known Nephili would falter. The girl was a useful tool, but she had only ever been that. A tool. A weapon to accomplish a singular purpose. He'd always known time and experience would blunt her edge sooner or later. Still, he'd hoped to get more use out of her before she finally succumbed. Father, please. Answer me, mewling whelp. Whining on like that. Who did she take him for? You ask me why. Here at last he raised his gaze to look her in the eye. She glared back at him, palms spread upon the table, face mere inches from his own. You know full well the reason. No, don't make that face. He silenced her with a wave of his hand when she made to protest. I will not hear of it. The Elden Ring is all that matters. Anything else is a secondary concern at best. Another lie, alas. None must take the throne. All knowledge must be his, all in order to prevent such a terrible occurrence. Including the medallion. Secondary? The whelp reared back as if she'd been struck. Even me. A curious twinge hit his heart. He strangled it. Even you. But why? She demanded to know. Why hurt those poor people? For the medallion? Where does it lead and to what? To a land beyond the mountains. He answered in kind. I came to them in good faith. They refused to grant my request. I asked only the medallion of them. No more. They were the ones who forced that fight. They were helpless. She didn't believe it, neither him nor the half-truth he dangled before her. A pity. My men weren't. The words hung between them. And you butchered them. She snarled at him. As they butchered those innocents, Gideon tried to leash his temper. It slipped free. Innocence, she said. Dolores had been innocent. And he knew full well what happened to her. A good woman, slain. Made a puppet by Soluvis, once his friend turned rival, that slimy snake. And this whelp dared to speak of such to him. There are no innocents. He thumped a fist down on the table. Not anymore. There was a time when you understood this. When she didn't answer, another suspicion reared its ugly head in his heart. That blonde oaf's gotten to you, hasn't he? You were to observe him. Not spread your legs for him. Her face flushed further. Father, no. That's not what this is about. It was. He knew much, and he realized what she did not. Fool of a girl. She was useless now, isn't it? He shook his head. If you cannot see the necessity of what I do, then I have no further use for you. She flinched. What are you saying? Go. Get out of my sight, I've no need of your services any longer. Bright eyes darkened beneath his rebuke. He wondered if she might cry. No. Ignore that. Sentiment would only weigh him down. He couldn't afford such fleeting feelings. Go serve that oaf if he pleases you so. Nephili pushed her hands off the table and loomed over him, shoulders trembling. Her hands twitched at her sides, clenching into fists. For a moment Gideon thought she might actually try to strike him. Paw! As if she could do such a thing. The pact remained sacrosanct, even now those most ancient magics prevented any such violence in the Round Table hold. She knew not how to pierce it, and he'd not tell her in any case. She did look furious, though. He is a better man than you. Her words stirred old, dark anger in him. Watch your tongue, girl, or I'll have Ensha pluck it out. You needn't worry about that. Something curious played across her face. I've said my piece, and heard enough. Her piece said, she stalked out. Gideon watched her go. Shook his head as she slammed the door behind her. Blast it. Such a willful lass. He would commend her spirit, but none would take the throne. Certainly not her. All knowledge would flow onto him, and with it, the power to prevent foolish upstarts like her from upsetting the status quo. Everything would remain as it was. Queen Marika had high hopes for them, that they continue to struggle. Unto eternity. Think you know her will, little man? What in blazes? Gideon paused, craned his neck about, but there was no one in the room. The hearth dimmed for a moment, then flared anew. He sighed and stifled a yawn behind one hand. What was that? Must be his imagination. He wasn't getting enough sleep. Perhaps later. He still had files to contend with, intelligence to file through, ciphers from his spies to decode. There was much to do. Plucking up the latest such missive drew a scowl to his lips. It was that Naruto lad again. His party was making inroads in Liurnia. Did he seek Renala's rune? Getting too big for his britches, that one. Might need to deal with him soon. No matter. Ensha would take care of it. He had friends here at the round table. Weaknesses. Easy to exploit. It was merely of a matter of whom. Rod Erika, Hyug, or perhaps the still recovering Trish. Best be rid of her soon. The tree sentinel was not a foe he'd wish to contend with, and he wasn't sure if she was bound by the pact. The door to his chambers crashed open, shattering that thought. Gideon's head snapped up. Panic bleated in his heart. No. Calm. The pact persisted. The hold was, by definition, a place where most tarnished were forbidden from harming one another. The ways around it were known to him and only him, and no other. Whoever this newcomer was, this brutish display of violence would avail them naught. Ensha! To me! Something shot through the shattered door, bounced off Gideon's desk, and skittered to a halt at his feet. An empty helmet carved from steel and gone. A familiar helm. He had all of an instant to see it, to look up from his desk and behold what caused the ruckus. Realization dawned. So his invasion failed. A pity, but not unexpected. He looked up, half expecting to see the tree sentinel woman wading her way through the wreckage. Instead he beheld a familiar face, tawny blonde hair, blue eyes, whiskered cheeks even now set in a scowl bordering on bloody murder. He saw the 3 great runes etched into his flesh. 3. He'd worn 2 only a few days before. Bollocks. Seemed the little fool had been busy since he'd seen him last. Must have felled Renala and taken her great rune for himself. How many more runes would he claim? Would his lust for power never be satisfied? Hello, Gideon, but none of that mattered now, because those blazing blue eyes met his across the desk and he was speaking to him. Let's have a chat. Gideon lifted his chin in stoic defiance. Talked with the girl, did you? Among other things. Naruto didn't lean over the desk as Nephili had. There was no need for that. His presence alone commanded enough weight. You could stand to be a bit nicer to her, you know. She's your daughter. Foster daughter. He corrected reflexively. The blonde hummed. It was a dangerous sound. I'm aware. You've already heard? Indeed, it seemed the whelp harbored suspicions. So I had no further use for her. He didn't miss the way those gloved hands curled into fists. Honestly, what's a man to do? There could be no mistaking it now, the faint twitch of the blonde's jaw. A determined plebeian is more wicked than an omen horn, quite frankly. I suspect, that's just what the queen wants. A dose of ambition, to incite the tarnished. You'd know a thing or two about that, wouldn't you? Gideon frowned. I beg your pardon, ambition. Naruto picked up a book and turned away, humming thoughtfully to himself as he thumbed through its pages. A log crackled in the hearth, shadow and flame flickered across the young man's downturned face. You know it well. A blue eye glanced back at him and for a moment, a fleeting sliver of a second, it almost sounded as if someone, were speaking with him. How can you not? You always were the grasping sort, ever reaching above your station, clamoring for more than your hands could hold. Small wonder she pitied you. A strange feeling twisted in Gideon's chest. He'd heard those words once before, but not from this man. Radon. Nonsense. Radon was dead and gone. Naruto bore his great rune, but it is in man's very nature to grasp, isn't it? Now he almost sounded like Godric. The key is knowledge. No, he realized. Not Godric, sharper somehow. Wiser. Godwin. Knowing when to stop and be happy with what you have. Some know when to be satisfied. Others are greedy. Those words felt like a slight against his very soul. Are you greedy, Gideon? Enough. He would not be baited by this brash boy. I do what I must. As do we all. We certainly do, don't we? The retort was delivered calmly, as though they were discussing the weather and not a potential maiming. All of us, each of us, do what we deem necessary. Satisfied with the tome he had selected, the blonde stowed it into his pack and picked up another, idly leafing through it. 3 seconds passed. 6, now. 9. Gideon waited for the other shoe to drop, and it surely did. But the way you butchered those poor albinorics. Blue eyes rose over the book to stare into his soul. Was that necessary? For the sake of the Elden Ring? Cut the crap. A fist thumped down and the words died in his throat, his confidence faltering in the face of those now gold eyes. I'll warn you this once. You better have a damn good reason for what you did. Because if you didn't, if you killed those people just because it was easier. Ha! As if he would be intimidated by such a remark. My reasons are my own. I hardly need explain myself to a whelp like you. Naruto's shadow twisted behind him, taking on the likeness of a grinning fox. Thought you might say that. Clearly we have nothing more to discuss. He looked back to his papers. You may leave, now. Wrong response. Those azure orbs narrowed to cerulean slits. Trish. Take him. Something impossibly large and terribly fast barreled through the remnants of the ruined door, vaulted the desk, and seized Gideon by both shoulders. Overpowered him, despite his struggles. Not enough to hurt or harm, but easily able to wrestle him out from behind cover all the same. In short order he found himself driven to the floor, head pressed into a dusty pallet. A knee slammed down into his back, forcing him lower still. His joints creaked ominously. Even then Gideon felt no fear. He craned his neck back, beheld the gilded, golden armor of his captor, and knew who had him. Ah! The blasted sentinel woman. You can't kill me. He sneered at her. You wouldn't dare. Your oath won't allow it. Her scarred face twisted in a silent scowl. She tightened her grip on him. His helmet began to buckle around his head. Hold, little one. A soft, unfamiliar voice spoke somewhere over their heads, giving her pause. If we break the pact of the Round Table, if you butcher him here, the hold will no longer be a place of peace. Tarnished will slaughter one another wholesale. Your precious spirit tuner will not be safe, to say nothing of the smith. Gideon smirked silently in his helm. The bloody blonde didn't. What do you propose? Why, that's simple. He still couldn't see the speaker, but he heard the smile in their voice. Take him elsewhere. That sounds grand. Yet another voice hummed. Trish. Keep him still. Horror broke like the dawn in his mind. Take him out the hold? No. They couldn't. They wouldn't. His back arched beneath the blonde's knee, body bucking violently. Too little, too late. Firm fingers tightened on the back of his head. Golden grace flashed. The world folded in on itself, taking his stomach with it and bringing on a profound pang of nausea. He must have blacked out for a moment, for when he came to, the hard floor was gone, replaced by a carpet of soft grass. A cursory glance confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't the hold at all. He didn't know where this was. Somewhere in Liurna, perhaps? He could see the Academy of Raya Lucaria in the distance and the light of the Erd tree besides, but beyond that, the waning light of the setting sun cast everything in shadow. He liked it not. He'd never liked the dark. An all too familiar voice dragged him back to reality. Must we do this? We tried it your way, Nephili. Now it's her turn. Here at last, dread seized Gideon. They'd dragged him out the hold. Such shouldn't be possible. Not without consent. Such required ancient magic, spells long since lost in the shattering. He tried to move, but that stupid sentinel had an iron grip on him, and her master was glaring bloody red daggers at him. There were others with him, a redhead he vaguely recognized from the hold and, oh. He saw Nephili with them. And there, behind her. The albinoric woman. Her eyes sharp and posture tense. Standing on her own 2 feet, wolf at her side. So this was how it was to be, then? He'd been had. Trish grabbed his helm and tore it free, exposing his face to the waning light. He squinted against it with a snarl. Gideon off near. The albinoric woman he'd never bothered to learn him name stepped forward and drew her bow. You stand accused of genocide against my people. How do you plead? He knew nothing he said would convince her of the necessity of it all. In her eyes, he was already damned. What a sad state of affairs this is. So he sneered at her instead. So you've slipped into his good graces too, then? What did this one promise you, Salvation for your people? Killing me won't bring them back. You know this. Whatever miracle has been bestowed upon you will die with you. A peal of laughter, short and sharp, silenced him. You'd like to think that, wouldn't you? She reached down and seized him by the chin, pinching his face. But you're wrong, oh all-hearing brute. So very wrong. Someday, a new generation of albinoric shall live through me. She touched a free hand to her flat stomach. Happy, healthy, and free of your kind's interference. This is the moment everything changes. He didn't miss the way the blonde buffoon flushed. Was he sweet on the woman? Didn't matter. His gaze sought out Naruto's allies, from the steadfast swordswoman to the timid seamster. Each glared at him in silent anger. He found no footholds there. There was another with them, standing in the shadows of the trees, but he couldn't see them. In a fit of rage, he squirmed against the sentinel holding him and glared her way. And you, then? He cast a black look at Nephili. You would turn your coat for a man such as this? You must realize he'll fail. Nephili held his gaze, and looked away. I tried to reason with you, father. This is for the best, he hissed. Your birth father never loved you. Hoera Lu cast you aside out of shame. Nephili flinched. That's a lie. Naruto chimed in. Nice try. And what of you? Gideon glared his way, spiteful now that he knew these to be his final moments. Do you think you'll be any different than those who came before you? You won't succeed. You'll falter, boy. Poison crept into his words, bubbling with venom. Just like Vike, Bernal, and all the rest. And even if by some miracle you survive, even if you make it all the way there, your work will be for naught. He strained against his bonds, lips parting in a twisted rictus of a grin. Your maiden will die. Trish snarled and cuffed the back of his head. Didn't matter. Gideon took sadistic joy in the uncertainty that flashed across the man's face. Why should I believe a word you say? Ha! He grinned through bloody teeth. She hasn't told you, has she? Ask her then. Call to her. Your joy shall turn to ashes in your mouth. The others tensed. Gideon saw his opportunity. Fools! The lot of you! He spat a cloud of shadows to blind them and slipped free in the chaos. I will not go quietly. You shall rue the day you're crossed. Moonlight pierced the darkness and struck him low in the chest. Physically blasted through him in the chest, tearing a hole through his ribs. Blood burst from his lips as he slumped to his knees. A quivering hand cupped at his wound. He mumbled a healing incantation, but the injury refused to close. Another came and went, to no avail. Death! This was death. He could feel his life force slipping away. He fumbled for his flask, only for another to rip it from his grasp. Little Gideon, a familiar voice crooned from the waning mists. Did you forget who it was that taught you such spells all those years ago? He forced himself upright on trembling limbs and looked upon his killer. No. Nay. Never. Not her. Anyone but her. Renala, queen of the full moon, smiled down at him. 'Twas not a pleasant smile by any means or measure. She was just as he remembered her, worse, she looked perfectly sane. Had his spies been wrong after all? This was not a woman past her prime. Not by any means or measure. He could feel the power thrumming within her, see that strange egg of her slung over her shoulder in a strange satchel. Wretched madwoman. He flung up a barrier and hurled a comet spell her way. You should have stayed in the academy. Mad? The taller woman laughed, a rich, husky sound that filled him with dread. I am rusty dear, not mad. Her brow furrowed, promising pain. And you have forgotten your place. Her staff tapped down and his spell evaporated, ripping his barrier away with it. You call yourself the all-knowing? Poor boy. You know nothing. Gideon gurgled in shock and prepared a counterspell, only for her to return the favor tenfold. Just as you know not of fear, his body buckled as another hole opened in his torso, because you have never felt it, until now. She smiled as he raised an arm. A torrent of moonlight blasted it off at the shoulder. Here, let me show you just what it feels like to experience true terror. Escape. He had to escape. Before it was too late, Gideon tried to stand. His left leg buckled, dragging him down instead. He glared at it, not quite comprehending when or how he'd taken an arrow to the knee. The albinoric woman drew her string back. He knew what was to come. He spat a curse, not at her, but that blasted blonde. I know, in my bones, a tarnished cannot become a lord. Not even you. A man cannot kill a god, but he is no man. A beautiful golden voice pierced his haze. And you are. Behold the futures you sought to forestall. Futures. Time slowed to a crawl. Gideon's world went white. For an instant he saw something. In that single blessed instant, he was granted vision, sight of a possible future to come. A new world. Beautiful and gold. Of songbirds and sunshine, of children's laughter. The Erd tree stood tall over it all, but it was not as he knew it. Looking upon it brought him a strange sense of peace, a happiness to fill his hollow heart. This future wasn't certain. Not set in stone, yet real enough to touch. He took a faltering step towards it and the scene changed, replaced by another. More. Yet more. Countless of them. Epiphany broke like the dawn and Gideon understood. He had been blind. This was one of many endings, a future that might yet be more than that. There were many worlds beyond this one, each of them bearing an Erd tree of their own. He glimpsed them as one might a reflection through a broken mirror, countless worlds, endless stories beyond stories spinning around him. In some he was an ally of the tarnished. In others, an enemy. At times, they never met at all. Some tales ended poorly. Most didn't. Yet more ventured into other worlds. Lands of fading fire. Of hunters and beasts. Of a one-armed wolf raging against impossible odds. Of others, not yet born. It was too much knowledge for Gideon's mind to bear. He broke, shattering under the impossible weight of the truth. He saw himself in one such fractured image, a world beyond this. A younger iteration of himself lying in a field of flowers with Dolores, a young Nephili resting in her lap. His heart ached. He'd been wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. He reached for that dim image, wishing for nothing more than to pull himself through. He wanted it. Needed it. Craved it like nothing else. Gideon strained for it with his remaining arm. Yes, he would drag himself through and... Then it was gone, snatched out his grasp like a loaf of bread, leaving him wanting more. Reality rushed back in and Gideon was left to stare death in the face, the slender shaft even now hurtling toward him. No! Come back! Give it back, he gibbered, grasping for the grace he could no longer see. I want to see it. I have to see it. Let me see it again. Nay. The voice denied him. This is your penance, and your punishment. An arrow slammed through Gideon's skull. His head snapped back. Blood flew through the air. Pain blossomed. But death did not come. Not quickly. He slumped over, thoughts lingering as darkness swarmed in. The albinoric woman drew a long hunting knife from her belt and raised it high over his neck. He knew what she intended. She would take his head as a trophy, parade it around the lands between like some grisly prize. Such was his fate. It was the least he deserved. The sun set. Her blade screamed down. It was the last thing Gideon saw. Nephili traipsed away from his corpse. She had to, rather, she must, for to stare over long at Gideon's headless body any longer would surely make her sick. She couldn't bear to watch her allies strip him of his valuables. Everything was taken from the all-knowing, both possessions and runes divvied up among the lot of them. Latenna took his head and helmet. Rennala laid claim to his staff. Millicent fused over the notes he'd had on him, and now she turned a weather eye to his boots, for her own were in sore need of repair. Even Little Bach was taking place in the looting, fussing over the man's cape and boots. Naruto alone stood apart from it all, and so it was to him she went. He faced away from her, eyes set upon the lakes and the ruined gate down below it. Melina stood by him in a rare moment of solidarity, but the words they shared were not kind. "Aren't you telling me?" He hissed at her as she drew near. "There's nothing to tell, Tarnished." She murmured. "Nothing has changed. The purpose I was born for is to die." He rounded on her and Nephili froze, not liking the look on his face. "Look me in the eye. Tell me it isn't true." Melina couldn't. Nephili pitied her for it. She shouldn't linger her. Shouldn't listen. But she couldn't help herself. Ha! A bitter laugh welled up from Naruto. Sure enough, he was the first to look away. "So that's it, then? You're just going to sacrifice yourself?" "When?" "After we reach the capital." Nephili paused. Gideon's parting words rang in her mind. Had he spoken the truth? Regardless, Melina didn't speak. Naruto made an anguished noise. "At least let me know when." Her lone eye flitted up to meet his. "If I tell you when, will you try to stop me?" "Of course I will." His forehead butted against hers, and to Nephili's dismay, the maiden actually leaned into him a little. "You're important to me." She tried to pull away at that, but he wasn't having it. His hand settled about her waist, holding fast. "I'm not about to let you stand aside and throw yourself on the pyre." She flinched at the last word and Naruto zeroed in on it, clever boy that he was. "Aha! It has something to do with fire, doesn't it? Cease! Have you not taken enough from me, Tarnished?" Anger burned in Melina's gaze, crackling in her voice like unspent flame. "Must you subvert my purpose, too? Stop that." His hand snapped up and cupped her by the face. "I'm not trying to subvert anything. I just don't want to say goodbye. I don't want you to die." Her head drooped, if only for a moment. "You?" Naruto blinked, anger fading. "Me? You, infuriating man." Melina's face rose. Her palm went with it. Nephili winced, knowing full well what was about to happen. She was too far away to stop it. There wasn't a thing she could do. She needn't have. Naruto took one hand from Melina's cheek and caught her by the wrist. The annoyed noise he made said this was commonplace between the two of them. In the same seamless movement he snatched up her other arm, blocked a furious kick with his left knee, pivoted, and slammed her back against the nearest tree. A shower of leaves rained down on their heads. Neither seemed to notice. Melina certainly didn't. Her composure shattered and she flung herself at the Tarnished like a she-devil, hissing and kicking him with singular fury. Absolute oaf. She head-butted him. He took it with good grace and stopped a knee from planting itself in his groin. Sassy maiden. For a moment she thought the maiden might kiss him. She stomped on his foot instead. Self-sacrificing blonde buffoon. Says the one who wants to die. He hooked an ankle around hers to keep her from kicking him again and they were off again, flinging insults at one another like a pair of children. Any tension that might have existed between them evaporated in an instant, and for all her own sorrows, Nephili found herself hiding a smile behind the palm of her hand. Curious pair, aren't they? The warrior craned her neck back, alarmed to find Rennala of all people standing beside her. "My lady. I didn't hear you approach." "Of course not, child. I didn't wish to be heard." The queen of the full moon baffled her. They said she was mad. Insane. Crazed. She didn't look mad. If anything, the air of Liurnia seemed to do her a well of good. She'd since abandoned her crown, ridiculous-looking thing, to let her hair flow free. Here and now, in the light of the rising moon, she looked every bit a mortal woman. Terribly tall and powerful enough to pick Gideon apart, but mortal nonetheless. She felt another pang of loss at that. She didn't want to think of his words, of his death, but it was still so fresh. Melina has her mother's blood and temper. Nephili turned her gaze back in time to see their squabble come to an ignominious end. Melina lay planted into the ground. Naruto was sitting on her back, legs crossed beneath him, a look of utter satisfaction stretched across his whiskered face. Judging by her struggles, she wouldn't be extricating herself anytime soon. Her mother, indeed. The queen hid a mysterious smile behind her hand. If I didn't know better, I'd say I was looking at her, here and now. Curiosity reared its head in Nephili's heart. Who is she? 'Tis not my tale to tell. Those piercing eyes sought hers, and she stiffened. I did, however, know your father. Your blood father. The words sent a shiver shooting down her spine. It was only in passing, but I believe I had the measure of him. The boy speaks the truth. Great Godfrey, or Hoaralu as you know him, would not have given you away unless there was no other choice. A hand came down on her head, musing her hair as a mother might a sullen child. Know that for certain. Heat flooded her face. How do you know? Godfrey was an honorable man, even as Marika's consort. Gentle fingers nudged her scalp and for a moment she felt very small indeed. Perhaps he did not wish to see you stripped of grace as he and his tarnished army were. Perhaps he sought to spare you. Who can say? Nevertheless, thou art the child of the first Elden Lord, no matter what some might say. Hold that knowledge with pride. Do you? Nephili swallowed once, choking down a sudden surge of emotion. Do you know where he is now? Somewhere in the Badlands, no doubt. I expect he will return soon. Confusion had Nephili cocking her head. Why? Grace calls to us all, child. I suspect the queen is calling to him even now. Now, go. She nudged her back. You've dallied long enough. Go speak with the boy if you wish. Heat seared through her face. I said no such thing. Renala tooted, ageless in her bemusement. Children these days, if you want him, then take him for yourself. Or don't. You aren't the only one after him. Her gaze traveled back to Mlisant and Latena, the later already stuffing Gideon's head in a sealed bag for safekeeping while the former helped Boc strip the last of the cloth from his armor. They will make their moves if you do not. Her throat closed. And you? Undecided? Came the answering hum. I shall make my decision after Rykard is dealt with. Now, cease thine stalling and move. Nephili sputtered and tried to dig her heels in. The queen wasn't having it. Another nudge spurred her forward against her will, forcing her to walk or trip outright. On faltering feet, she approached Naruto and Melina. Still trapped under Naruto, the latter saw her first and her pale face went red with shame. We shall speak of this later. She vanished into motes of blue light with those words. Run all you like. Naruto shook a fist after her fading form. This isn't over. Nephili coughed into a fist, drawing his gaze. He looked back her way with a chagrined smile. How much of that did you see? Enough. She nudged his shoulder with her own. You were quite vocal, earlier. Ah. He scratched at his cheek with one finger and looked away. Kind have to be that way with Melina. She'd throw herself on a spike if it meant saving the world. And you? Nephili blinked. Me? How are you doing? He granted her a rueful grin. You look about as exhausted as I feel. She'd almost forgotten about Gideon. The thought shamed her soul. Her entire body felt heavy, both in shoulders and spirit. In all her years, she'd never thought it would come to this. Perhaps that made her foolish. Naive. Gideon had been her foster father. Raised her, for lack of a better word. She had looked to him for understanding. Wisdom. Guidance. At the end, she'd thought he might be able to explain himself, to say something, anything, justify his horrific misdeeds. Reason it all away. But no, there had been no justifications. Only pain, misery and the bitter, bitter realization of her own foolishness. Gideon had never loved her. She'd been naught but a tool to him. A weapon. Nothing more. And now he was gone. Had it all been for nothing in the end? She would not weep. She would not wail. She was a warrior. She was, ugh, she was. A hand settled upon her bare shoulder. Need a minute? Yes. Anger sparked. Shame at admitting her weakness as much as being seen in such a state. She tore herself from his grasp, walked a few paces, and plunked herself down. She didn't trust the ground and so glared at the starry sky above. "Do not look upon me. I would not have you see my tears. Ain't nothing to be ashamed of." He sat beside her, swinging himself down onto a nearby tree stump. "People cry all the time. Even so." She looked away from him. "I shall return to the hold. I need some time to think. At least let BOC go with you. He's good at cheering folks up. I think I shall do that." Silence stretched between them. She didn't dare break it. "I get it." Naruto's head bobbed in understanding. "Gideon raised you, even if he wasn't your blood. You can't forget something like that." "Believe me, I understand." Her gaze swung back his way. "You've lost someone too, haven't you?" "Several someones." He scooted a little closer, surprised her now, by laying his head on her shoulder. "I could fill a book with all the names I've lost, the friends I've buried, the funerals I've seen." A rueful chuckle tumbled past his lips. "There have been so many. I know it hurts." He reached a hand up and past her, as though to grasp at the very stars themselves. "Pain is a part of life. But it's what you do with that pain that defines you. And what did you do with yours?" "I embraced it." He looked her square in the eye. "I decided to live on in their memory. You can cry, if you want to. Go ahead. Let it out." "I won't say a word." A single tear rolled down her cheek. It was the prelude to the flood and she lost all control. She turned and slotted against him. Naruto was true to his word. He didn't push her away. An armored arm looped loosely round her shoulders in a half-hug. That tore it. Despite her best efforts, a sob tore out of her. It was an ugly, wretched sound. She buried her head in his chest, trying to staunch her tears. She failed. Naruto held her while she wailed. "There you go, let it all out." Ria found herself in a bit of pickle. She must get her necklace back. She simply must. She couldn't return to the manor without it. Well, she could, technically speaking, but such would be an arduous journey, and the teleportation afforded her by Mother's trinket was far more expedient. Lady Tanith would understand, of course, even if she would be disappointed. She couldn't bear the thought. But there was nothing that could be done. She'd already tried to retrieve the necklace, and failed miserably for it. Just thinking of her failure made her flinch. Oh, the shame of it all. To lose her most treasured possession to that brute. And all for a bit of prawn. He'd tricked her. Deceived her. How was she to know it was meant to be a trade? He'd never said such. She'd begged and pleaded with that blackguard, but alas, her cries had fallen on deaf ears. In the end the heartless fiend had shouted and chased her away until she'd run here, to this tiny tower in the lake. She dare not leave it. The lakes were not safe. She could hear things out there, awful monsters that would happily grind her bones. She spied some movement out beyond the trees and ducked down behind the stones. Hopefully it wasn't more of those terrible albinorics with their clubs. She'd barely gotten away from the last bunch. Why must all the creatures here be so wretchedly hostile? Even those awful crustaceans wanted a piece of her. Really? What was a scout to do? She wasn't a fighter. Did she dare wait for night and ambush the braggart then? Such might be possible. She knew he had the necklace on his person. If she could but snatch it from him and bolt, she might be able to get away. Might. Or she might die, pummeled to a pulp beneath those awful metal gauntlets of his. Her knees quivered at the thought. "Look, I keep telling you," a man's voice came across the water, breaking through her maudlin musings. "We need to find Greyrole, first." Ria perked up. Her fist instinct was to hide. Curiosity suppressed it. She peeked out from cover, peering into the morning mists. "Be that as it may," a woman's voice intoned, "we know not where she went. She has Theralina and Agil with her, my lord." A third voice joined the second. "She will be fine. Fine. I guess she'll be fine on her own a little while longer." Ria could resist no longer. This group didn't sound hostile, and she was in dire need of aid. She dared to lean out yet further. As though waiting for that very moment, the mists peeled away and revealed her quarry. They were not beasts as she feared. On the contrary, they were a rather eclectic band, all things considered: a woman riding a wolf, a one-armed redhead, a tall lady in deep blue robes, and, oh, Oh my. My. That tall fellow there leading them, the one wearing drake scale armor. She saw something etched into on his chest, arm and neck. Closer inspection confirmed her suspicions. They were 3 great runes. Each one shining like the sun. Gods above. 3. Mother had never told her of a tarnished like this. Surely the manor would have known of such. She took him in at a glance, those bright blue eyes, tawny blonde hair, whiskered cheeks dimpling in a smile as he conversed with his companions. Strength poured from in waves. She could sense it. Taste it on her tongue. This one would be a worthy champion indeed, if she could convince him to join the manor. But how to go about it? Oh! She just had the most wonderful idea. What was the saying Mother always used? Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Yes. That was it. Well. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Hello. She cupped both hands before her face and called out. You there. Might I have a moment of your time? The party paused. Its leader turned to approach her, ascending the steps at a clip. He looked at her. Really looked at her. Saw right through her, somehow. A faint quirk of his lips had her heart quickening, and yet he said nothing. Silence stretched between them. It's, rather chilly here, isn't it? Ria piped up at the last, hoping to break the ice between them. I'm sorry, I'm rambling, aren't I? My mistress sent me off on an errand, but I was accosted by a ruffian and now I'm in a bit of a bind. Her palm itched anew and she wrung them together, stifling the urge to scratch them. Could I ask you to lend a hand, perhaps? That thug made off with a precious necklace of mine. I need someone to retrieve it. Only, she gulped a little, worrying at the sudden sharpness in his eyes. Well, he too, is a tarnished. She mumbled out. If you've any qualms confronting your own, I shall find another. I'll take care of it. Even his voice was soothing, most pleasant to the ear. Oh! Thank you dearly. She couldn't keep the words from rushing out. What a blessing that we've met like this. Eager to make herself useful, she stepped past him and cast a finger in the direction she'd come. That thug should be resting at an abandoned home down the way. Please, I must have the necklace back, it means the world to me. Sure. The blonde seemed happy enough to grant her such. Renala, you mind watching her for a sec? The tall woman nodded once. Not at all. Renala? The Lady Renala? No, surely not. Perhaps it was someone who shared her name, and appearance, and manner of speech. Oh, dear. She really did feel quite small in her presence. Ria reined in her emotions with an effort. She mustn't transform here. To do so would surely see her slain. Calm. Must be clam. Don't panic. Off the tarnished went without a word, and his 2 companions with him. That left the tall woman eyeing her most strangely. Have I offended you in some manner, my lady? No, the woman hummed after a thoughtful moment's pause, you simply remind me of someone. Curious. A minute passed in silence. Then another. Yet another still. Ria just begun to lose hope when she heard it, a muffled explosion, followed by the faint sound of gibbering. Had they found the lout so quickly? Odd. It almost sounded as if he were apologizing. Begging for his life, even. Surely she imagined such a thing. He certainly hadn't said as much to her. And so she waited still. Another minute elapsed. Finally, she heard the footsteps. She wasn't surprised to see him again. Any tarnished who held 3 great runes was surely no pushover. Sorry to keep you waiting. The tarnished and his silent companions sauntered back, looking no worse for the wear. It was a bit of a misunderstanding. He won't do it again. Did you kill him? Nah. A hand waved. Thumped him upside the head once or twice. He's learned his lesson. And, he reached into his pouch, removing a familiar bauble. He coughed this up. Yes. Ria felt heart-sore at the glimmer of gold, such that she nearly hissed with glee. That is indeed my necklace. Thank you kindly. Would you mind? Not at all. She turned her back to him, not once doubting his intent. He stepped to her silently. Nimble fingers danced across her collarbone as fiddled with the clasp of her necklace, reaching down and around, the better to fasten it to her neck. This close, he smelled of fire and blood, smoke and sunshine mingling with a sickly sweet scent she couldn't quite identify. Like overripe fruit on the verge of rotting. Such a curious contrast. It made her want to nuzzle him and, wait. What was he doing now? He'd fixed his necklace, but now fingers were stroking her scalp, idly tousling her hair for reasons she couldn't quite comprehend. It felt nice, no. Focus. Rhea straightened with a squeak, heat flashing through her pale face. Why are you patting my head? The blonde paused. Blinked. You know, I'm no sure really. Just couldn't help myself. I didn't say stop. He coughed a laugh into his fist. She did the same, desperate to hide her embarrassment. Ahem. Nevertheless, I am in your debt. His smile set her heart aflutter. How very strange. It's no problem, miss. Goodness gracious, she hadn't even given him her name. Did I forget to introduce myself? I am Rhea. She sketched a quick curtsy, cursing herself for the slip. In the service of Lady Tanith, of the Volcano Manor. Nor did she miss the bemused looks his party exchanged among themselves. I seek stalwart tarnished who might join our house. You are very brave yourself. Much more than that, she wanted to say, but such wouldn't be proper. Not only a steady hand, but a steady heart, merciless even to your own kind. His lips quirked. I wouldn't call myself merciless. Even so. Please, take this invitation. She pressed a letter into his grasp. You should seek the Altus Plateau, the realm of the Erd Tree. He waved her on, and she was eager to regale him further. Do so, and the Volcano Manor will fully extend its invitation. To fight, amongst a family of champions. I have faith in you. Or you could take us there now. His words cut through her thoughts. I couldn't. She looked away. It wouldn't be proper. Well, don't you owe me? I mean, I got your necklace back. His smile disarmed her at the last. What was the harm? He seemed a kind sort. And she did rather enjoy those head pats. Very well. Let my hand rest upon you, for but a moment. He gave his hand gladly. But his fingers were warm. It was like holding the sun in the palm of her hand. Tanith saw the light. Excellent. Zorias had returned from her scouting mission. Much to her surprise, she'd brought champions. Plural. More than one. She spied a man in drake-scale armor wearing 3 great runes. Someone had been a busy boy, another with lovely red hair, and a third sitting astride a great whirl. This tarnished and his companions she knew not, but that was a very large woman behind him. She sat a little straighter in her seat. No. Nay. That couldn't be. It just couldn't. Oh, dear. Hello, dear Tanith. Lady Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, smiled upon her. That smile was far too sharp for her liking. Might you know where my son is hiding? He's in sore need of a spanking. She tried to speak, but her lord's mother buelled right over her. And do take off that mask, girl. 'Tis unseemly to hide your face in such a manner, a stronger soul would have argued. Railed against her demands, but for Tanith? There could be only response given. She complied with a whimper. Rykard opened his eyes. HRRMM. Who disturbs my slumber? Strange. He thought he'd heard a scream just now, but his cavern remained silent, filled with naught but corpses. Nonsense. Must have been his imagination again. Back to sleep he went. More fool he. Chapter 13, Together. Mothers were terrifying. Such a phrase embodied Renala perfectly in this moment, Naruto found, as he watched her tear into Tanith. It also brought another to mind. Never piss off a mother. He knew that one to be a fundamental truth, one he'd both learned the hard way and seen firsthand. When he'd finally met his own mother some years ago, he'd come to understand that there were certain lines you just didn't cross. Kushina was awesome and all, but he'd soon come to dread the idea of ever making her angry. Nope. Nah. Don't do it. In conclusion, he'd learned 3 things. Moms were scary. Don't mess with a scary mother. Never come between a mother and her child. In a matter of minutes Renala had browbeaten Tanith into both removing her mask and divulging Rykard's location. That she hadn't reduced the poor woman to a whimpering wreck at their feet was honestly something of a miracle and one he'd chalked up to chance. If it weren't for Rhea, he suspected she might have killed the lady of the manor outright, who, as luck would have it, turned out to be was Renala's granddaughter. Small world. Again, he couldn't much blame her for that. In the end it wasn't his concern. Even now he could feel Tanith glaring bloody daggers at him. How someone so beautiful could have such a twisted heart was beyond him. How could you serve Rykard, knowing what he did? What he was? Maybe she had her own reasons. Everyone did. It shouldn't bother him, but it did. It really, truly did. Naruto pivoted away from the door to look at her. Alright, I'll bite. What's eating you? Much to his surprise, Tanith complied. Ha! Neat. Why are you here? Thought that was obvious. He's going to help Lady Renala say Rykard. Millicent's voice called down from the main hall. He flicked her a quick glance. She looked a little weary from dispatching the sentries outside, but otherwise no worse for the wear, and Latenna was still with her. Good. Their party remained intact. Don't try to stop him. It won't end well for you. Tanith blanched, looping a strand of dark hair around her finger as she fussed over the words. When you say kill, Radon was to be pitted. Latenna clicked her tongue in mild admonishment. That monster will not be. We shall see. Renala swept out from an adjacent room, smoothing down her robes. His fate remains to be seen. Death. Kurama chimed. It's going to be death. Nothing else will do. Naruto noticed the absence of their guide straight away. Where's Rhea? I spelled the girl to sleep. For once, her smile seemed less strained, realizing Rhea was kin seemed to have done wonders for her mood. She need not be awake for this. His spirits sank. So they were really doing this, then? No. Tanith must have realized it too, because she all but flung herself at him. You mustn't. He is our lord. I won't let you take him. Naruto caught her by the wrists and firmly wrestled the inconsolable woman back into her chair. Behind her, the Crucible Knight stiffened, but made no move to intervene. Just as well too, he was ready to turn them inside out if they lifted their sword now. It didn't stop Tanith from flailing at him, wailing, weeping, cursing his very name, and he began to wonder if he would have to put her down for good. In the end, there was no need for either. Renala flicked her scepter in Tanith's direction. Sleep. The weary woman slumped with a woeful whimper, and after a moment, her Crucible Knight suffered the same. Even in slumber the silent sentinel remained standing. He couldn't fathom the kind of dedication that took. If it weren't for its helm bobbing, he would have thought the creature unaffected. He stepped up and gave its breastplate poke. No response. Right, that settles it. That spell is overpowered. Indeed. The mistress of magic hummed. Alas, it only works on humanoids, half of which have proven their enemies. Still pretty damn useful, she preened. You have my thanks. Shall we go, then? Alright. Naruto pinched the bridge of his nose and heaved a sigh. Now came the hard part. Millicent, Latenna. Each perked up when he called their name, which made this all the more difficult for him. I need both of you to stay here and keep an eye on the manor. Millicent gave him a fearsome pout, bless her sweet, simple soul. My place is by your side, my lord. Latenna folded both arms before her chest. I concur. You shouldn't face such a beast alone. I won't be alone. He countered. Renala's coming with me. Millicent looked to her, golden eyes narrow. Why? The queen favored her with a small, sad smile. Because, dear girl, Rykard is my son. Understanding dawned in her gaze. Pity soon accompanied it. You have my condolences. Latenna still looked fit to argue the point. Eventually, she wilted under his stare. I'll allow it this once. There will not be a second time. Proud little thing she was, unable to say how she really felt. In truth, he couldn't blame them their protest, but he had good reason for this. He'd already killed Radon, and truth be told, he didn't much like the idea of killing another soul who could be saved. Millicent had nearly died against Radon. He wasn't about to risk her against something far worse. Latenna was skilled, make no mistake, but her arrows would be of no help against what they were to face. Better they stay here, where it was safe, and prevent any stray recusants from flanking them. Those, they could handle. Rykard was another matter. He couldn't bear the thought of them coming to harm. Naruto patted her shoulder. Thank you. Runni opened her good eye with a lingering frown. Strange. She'd experienced the most curious dream. She had dreamed of mother. 'Twas nothing, surely, wasn't it? Naruto followed Rennala down. Down, down, down they went, through the manor, through the prison town and all its horrors, through all the blasphemy that followed. Into darkened shadows rife with corruption, abominations, and broken souls beyond any hope of redemption. None were spared. They were, all of them, put to the word. In truth, the fights that followed were a blur, for he didn't wish to recall the wretched creatures he fought, nor the ghastly abomination and beasts that took pride in their power. Man-serpents, crazed albinorics, even the odd-omen killer and feral dog, all were slaughtered. Rennala acquitted herself well throughout the chaos. He hadn't had a chance to see her fight before. What she'd done to Gideon had been an execution, not proper battle. But this was poetry in motion. Fluid grace personified. She was no god, or even a demigod at that, yet she had power all the same. Her spells knew no mercy, her summons even less so. Like watching a well-trained dancer sway atop her stage, so too did he find himself amazed. More than once he caught her smiling as her sorceries scythed down serpents, heard her bell-like laugh as swatted aside twisted wretches who crossed their path. Yet in the same vein she proved her mercy, gently putting maddened albinorics out their misery. Of course that wasn't to say he let her do all the fighting. When they encountered a magma Wyrm, he annihilated it with a raisin shuriken. Likewise, Kurama's jaws made short work of the god-skin noble they encountered in the temple of Iglay. It was merely a matter of luring the massive oaf outside and then, crunch. Honestly, nothing put up much of a fight. It gave him time to think. Millicent and Latenna weren't happy at being left behind with Ria, but he knew they'd understand in time. Someone was needed to keep Bernal and the rest from fleeing, for the ranks of the recusants would surely break once Rykard was dealt with. They couldn't have killers like that out and about in the world. Rykard, he was their sin to bear. This was something he and Rennala needed to do, alone. It was better this way. Had to be the two of them, you know. Someone else might have gotten it wrong, and then they found him. It wasn't a sudden thing by any means. The ground sloped suddenly past a lava flow and they followed it. Soon enough their path branched off into a cavern and past that, massive chamber filled with calcified bodies, poor souls froze in their final moments of horror. Their faces told him all he needed to know. They'd arrived. One such being clutched a massive spear in hand. Naruto snatched it up without thinking. Not a bad tool. Still has some power in it. He saw the beast before Rennala did. A tangled mass of scales lurked in the center of the chamber, writhing over an ugly pool of magma. A grisly heartbeat thumped in his ears, a steady thud-thud-thud that threatened to swallow the very world. Just being near it threatened to deafen him. Still no sign of Rykard, though. He could sense something nearby, a vague, oily presence, slipping through his grasp when he tried to focus, but where? Rennala's breath hitched in her throat. It brought him back to himself and he turned to find her stepping back, one hand over her mouth. I thought I was ready, the words tumbled from her lips, but this is beyond what I imagined. He couldn't blame her. This place, no, that didn't do this den of depravity justice. This place was a grave. A tomb for countless dead, many lured to their death in the name of greatness. Some might have come of their own accord, seeking an audience. The knowledge did little to diminish his disgust. They died all the same. Rennala wasn't moving. The onus of choice fell upon him. What do you want to do? This. Rennala steeled herself, raised her scepter at the serpent and her voice with it. Rykard. I would have words with thee. Show thyself at once. A chance came over the creature. Tiny, minuscule at first, so small he didn't even notice it, not right away. The beast dragged his head back, scales scraping across the hardened floor. Slowly, almost ponderously, it rose to regard them. He tensed, anticipating an attack, some suicidal lunge. It never happened. The serpent continued to rise, and rise and rise. Hideous limbs burst from its body at jarring angles. Arms. Legs. Too many. His gorge rose as the chamber began to tremble. He's coming. Who? What are you talking about? Naruto had his answer a heartbeat later. As he looked on aghast, the beast turned its head round to regard them, revealing something near what passed for the back of its skull. Were those scales? No, scales didn't look like that. A bruise of some sort? Whatever it was, the ghastly thing was moving. Opening their eyes. Not a bruise. Not at all. It took him a long moment to realize who he was looking at, but once he did, he immediately wished he hadn't. Renala's words came to mind. He fed himself to the serpent. The face twitched, as though waking from a long slumber. Very well. A twisted limb stretched from the snake's skin and thrust itself into the serpent's gaping maw. Pale fingers found the hilt of a long sword, once golden, now covered in rusted blood, and tugged it free. He could see the wriggling tendrils etched upon it, those countless, innumerable dead falling into the magma below. Much to his chagrin, the viper pivoted to gaze upon them. The serpent stirred. Who speaks to me so? Renala stepped forth. Thy mother. All went still. I see. Rykard hissed a low laugh, shattering the silence. It is good of you to come to me. Now join the Serpent King as family. His very voice promised death. Together, we shall devour, the very goddess. Renala looked upon him, mute with horror. What have you become? That got a reaction. The abomination hissed down at her. I am what you made me. Me? The words burst out of the carrion queen in a bitter laugh. No, she shook her head, setting her dark hair swaying. No, no, no. I had no part in this. You fed yourself to that thing, and where else was I to turn, mother? His words were pure poison, hissing out every second syllable. Godwin lay dead. Radon, rotten by Malnia, who fled to parts unknown with her dearest Miquella. Father is gone, and his whore of a queen with him. I will break the cycle. And you? He leaned forward to leer at her, massive face mere inches from her own. You are no better than Runni. A wretched sadado of a sister, come to claim what is rightfully mine. I won't allow it. Renala made an anguished noise. Naruto felt his right ear twitch despite it. Runni, hadn't he heard that name before? It had been a while, but near the beginning of his journey, hadn't there been a meddling witch who offered him a bell? She'd identified herself as Rena at first, before he'd wheedled her real name out of her, then fled shortly thereafter. Could it be? The Runni he'd met, and the one Rykard spoke of, could they be one and the same? Renala snapped something at Rykard. He caught the tail end of it, little more. Speak ill of the dead. Dead? Another raspy chuckle. Is that what you think? No. Oh, yes. That hideous visage twisted in a dark rictus of a grin. She lives. A cishado of her former self, lurking in the old manor, hiding from the two fingers. You lie. Naruto raised a tentative hand. Actually, he doesn't. Renala rounded on him with wide eyes. Explain yourself at once. Well, I met someone named Runni a while back. He scratched the back of his head beneath her fierce scowl. Granted, she called herself Rena before I managed to ferret out her real name, but, yeah. Her body seemed kinda weird, all empty and hollow, like she wasn't even there. Just a spirit clinging on to life. Rykard made a pleased nose. See? Even your servant betrays you. Enough. Clenched knuckles slammed into his chin, cutting him short. Naruto stalked after him. His arms betrayed him, casting aside the serpent slayer to reach over his shoulders for Radon's twin greatswords. The general's great rune burned in his shoulder. Such a strange feeling. Did he take wicked pleasure in shutting Rykard up? Possibly. Did he enjoy watching that sadistic serpent fly across the chamber? Most certainly. Was he going to do it again? Undoubtedly. Rykard coiled upright and rounded on him with a sibilant hiss. And what is this, then? You dare defy a god? Naruto opened his mouth to reply, closed it now as a firm hand settled on his shoulder. He jolted, startled to find Radon's specter standing beside him, face carved from stone. He glared at it. The Runwraith glared back at him. Guilt and regret reared their ugly heads in his heart. No! Not now! Had he come to torment him once more? The wraith spoke, lips moving slowly. As ever, no sound emerged for him to hear. Indeed, he couldn't hear a word he said, but at this close proximity, he found he could read them all the same. 6 little words. A simple series of syllables, no more. They shook him to his core. Finish him, please. Use my blades. Understanding broke like the dawn, burning away his dread. Naruto clapped a hand to his own face. Laughter echoed in the cavern. Art thou broken? Renala looked to him, aghast, fearing the worst. Hast thou gone mad? Maybe I have. He wiped a mirthful tear from the corner of his eye. It's almost funny. I'm thankful, you know. Rykard, no. The creature wearing his likeness made a low noise that might have been anger or confusion. Impossible to tell. Hrrm, I thought we might be able to save you. He chambered the black blades, taking a step forward. Rykard slithered backward as his smile grew. I wanted to try, you know. After what happened to Radon, to your brother, it seemed the least I could do. But now, the serpent struck with a snarl as he spoke, and his body responded accordingly. For the first time since he'd slain Radon, he felt the man's blades move with him. Help him. Guiding his body into a high stance he'd never known. It felt good. Felt right. He embraced it. Let it fill him. A single sweep of his arms parried the fallen god's sword and brought Rykard low. I know what I need to do. Rykard reared back, on the defensive. You wish to fight me? Fight you? Blue eyes misted over with gold. No. I want to kill you. Rykard hoisted his sword high. Even with Radon's power, you cannot best me. Naruto raised the Star Scourge greatswords and shouted to the sky. Radon's weapons answered with a mournful dirge of their own, bathing the chamber in baleful violet light. Gravity itself inverted, yanking the Serpent King forward. From there he swept in and swung hard, carving a canyon across rotten scales in a single sweeping cut. Blood bubbled across Rykard's bulk, warping his cry into a roar of rage. You dare! A sphere of purest moonlight smote him in the face to stun him. Bless Renala and her spells. Wretch! Rykard swatted her acid. Naruto saw his opportunity for what it was and waded in. Rykard saw him coming, tried to ward him away with a spindly limb. Too large. Too slow. He let the abomination's lunge sweep harmlessly overhead, slashed it off at the elbow, ducked another, and cut into him again. The Star Scourge greatswords bit deep. More of Rykard's bulk gave way with a squeal of pain. He kept cutting. That was all he had to do. Mercy meant nothing here, no, less than nothing, because Rykard no longer deserved it. He cut and cut and cut, uncaring of the blood splashing his face, of the magma melting his armor, until finally, the Titan fell at his feet. Even then, he didn't die. I will not perish. Yes, you will. He stomped down on the serpent's face, raising Radon's blades overhead one last time. See, I'm starting to realize something. She was right. Maybe I am broken. Rykard gurgled in wordless pain below him. But I do not care. He stabbed down. People like you need to die. Rykard shuddered. Never. I'm sorry, Rykard. Renala limped over to them before he could deal the final blow. For all of it. She laid a hand on his ruined visage, her voice wavering at the last. For breaking after your father left. For not being there for you, for Runni, for Radon. I wish I could take it all back. A mangled eye rolled towards her. Rykard is gone. I am what remainsis. She closed her eyes. Nevertheless, you were right. Failed you. You did not destroy Rykard. A flicker of sanity stirred in the depths of his eyes. I did. It died a moment later. The same way I will destroy you. Renala's face closed down. Then my son is truly dead. The beast spat magma in her face. For once in her life Renala was hair too slow. But she didn't falter. She cried out and powered through. Even as he burned her, she swept in, twirled her weapon. Her staff scythed up and stabbed down, slamming into his skull. The glintstone bit deep into an already open wound. Blue light built behind his eyes. Glimmered in his skin. Panic mounted within. The creature tried to plead. Mother, wait. No. Please. Renala snarled a sorcery, drowning his words out. Moonlight shone through Rykard's ruined body, penetrating his every orifice in an instant. He burst, not into blood, but runes, the sheer magnitude of which struck each of him and Renala like a wave, forcing them to their knees. Yet there among them, gleaming brighter than the rest. Gotcha! Naruto grabbed Rykard's greater rune and slammed it into his left shoulder without hesitation. It seared itself into his flesh, glowing a cherry amber to match Radon's on the right. Power coursed through him, vibrating his very veins with vicious vitality. He shuddered against it, taking a moment to center himself as pain spiked through his chest. And a voice trickled in his ear. Fool! No one will hold me captive. Sure enough, Rykard snarled at him, defiant to the last. He'd anticipated such. A spurnt never dies. I shall grow anew in your body and swallow the world. Blue eyes rolled. No, you won't. You cannot stop me. Kurama, on it. Golden chakra burned through his veins and clamped down on the malignant tumor before it could truly root in him. What remained of Rykard's consciousness burned away with a sibilant shriek. His pleas withered away to whispers, and then, not even those. Only his power remained. Fuel for the furnace. Still the pain lingered, causing his muscles to spasm. 4 great runes now. How many were left? Enough. We can handle it. Bleck, he tasted foul. Naruto looked back to Renala and found her where he'd left her, sprawled down on her knees. She didn't budge. One hand idly stroked her burned face. He could see scorched muscle and a hint of bone. His body howled at him when he tried to move, but he managed to rise on faltering legs and limped her way. Wasn't fair to leave her like that. Not after what she'd been through. He saw it and winced. No. She batted his hands away. Let me be. What are you on about? Hold still and let me heal ya. I deserve this. Renala rounded on him, good eye-watering. Look upon me. A mother who slays her own son. She laughed bitterly at Rykard's still resolving remains. Let the world see me for the monster I am. Indignation sparked in him. Screw that. I've had enough of people refusing to be healed. He cupped her face in his hands again, firmly this time, wincing only a little when she hissed in pain. She'd lost an eye, too. Easy fix, that. Ignoring the tremor still racking his body, he closed his eyes, mustered up his chakra and gave it a nudge, directing it into her ruined face. Remarkably, Renala allowed it. He knew she could have broken his arms in 3 different places, skewered him with spells, yet she let him all the same. It spoke volumes of her trust in him. He didn't see her face heal, but he heard her little gasps all the same. A minute passed. Another still. Without warning, he felt Renala shift against him, dragging his hands down. Thank you. She said at last. Open your eyes, please. Naruto let go and dared to do just that. Against his better judgment he looked down. He had to, just to confirm his suspicions. Sure enough, Renala lay in his lap, fully healed, head resting between his legs. His own nearly went scarlet. No, no, no. Calm down. This was perfectly natural. She was just resting. Yeah. That was it. Nothing untoward here. Nothing at all, eh? A lone hand rose to cup one of his cheeks, stroking his whiskers with one thumb. Thank you. She spoke softly, her words a naked whisper. Thou art a true companion. I am unworthy of your loyalty. Allow me to repay you in some small measure. She raised her head from his lap and tugged his face down to hers with intent. Soft. That was his first thought, strange as it might sound. Renala's lips were soft, sweet, and infinitely yielding to him. Even now she tilted her head to get a better angle, one he found himself returning as he warmed to her, leaning into her arms. How could he not? She was a beautiful woman and they'd just been through hell and back together. More than that, his blood was up. He couldn't stop himself if he wanted to. She made a pleased sound and looped both arms round his neck, dragging him out from under her and down, all but pulling him atop her in her haste to get at him. He felt the hard ground poke at his skin through the tears in his armor, but it was a faint, distant concern, because now she was deepening the kiss, pulling him closer, her tongue tangling with his. Code red. To battle stations. All hands on deck. He could feel her body beneath her robes, softer than soft, her curves warm beneath her fingers. It was all he could do not to tear her clothes away. His armor proved an unexpected boon in that regard. When it became clear that Rennala wouldn't be able to remove the melted metal in its current state, she drew away with a reluctant sigh. There. She laid back down and nuzzled into his side. Have I made my intentions clear? He managed a numb nod. Pretty sure you did. Good. Our accord is complete, but I'm afraid I must ask thee a boon once more. Her face darkened even as she spoke, one hand idly tracing his chst. Run me, if my daughter yet lives as you and Rykard claim. She does. He put in quickly, dashing her fears. Don't doubt that. Then I must speak with her. Rennala tried to rise, grimaced when her legs failed her. Take her to task for what she's done. 'Twas she who wrought all this. I would have answers. Easier said than done, that. She might well flee if she knew they were coming. He chose not to say such. She'd suffered enough. Naruto quirked a brow at her. And if you don't like them? Rennala frowned. Then I shall punish her. Oh. She tried to stand again. Faltered. Might I lie here a while? Naruto patted her head, running his fingers through her dark hair. As long as you need. Her frown faded into a smile as she nestled into his side. I just might take thee up on that. He'd eaten Rykard. Such should not be possible, yet Tanith knew it to be true. She woke from the sleeping spell and saw him coming up the stairs and knew the truth. Rykard had been consumed. Of that, there could be no doubt. Even now she could feel his power listing within him. The man who had plucked her from her wretched homeland and given her a place at his side, was no more. Her mind threaded into fractures, threatening to shatter at the slightest provocation. Gone. Gone, just, gone. Her knight wasn't nearly so hesitant. The stalwart warrior took one look at the tarnished, saw the new great rune he bore in his shoulder, and attacked. His speed was great, his strength greater. He was upon the blonde in an instant. There was no time to move, nay, to even react. Clang! Tanith didn't see the blow that felled him. But she heard it all the same. Saw the poor warrior crushed against the wall. The tarnished lowered his fist. Stay there if you know what's good for you. Her mind raced. She could not die here. She wished to live. But this Naruto had consumed her lord. Wait. If he had done so, if Rykard's power lived in him, then were they not one and the same? Was this not his plan? Had her lord been reborn in him? Her fractured mind pounced on the notion, clinging to it as a child would their mother's skirt. Yes, that must be it. Jiraiya seemed fond of him. That, she knew, was her only chance. Appeal to his better nature. She must make amends before her daughter woke, and soon. And so she flung herself at his feet, bowed her head until it touched the floor. Please, let me serve you Nano, Lord Naruto. He looked surprised by the words. Had he not planned this? No. Surely he must have. She barreled on, fearing the stroke of his sword at any moment. Your triumph has opened my eyes. You bear 4 great runes now. Mustn't look him in the eye over long, not until she was finished. None have come so far as thee. I have made many a mistake, but if it is your will, then I shall spend the rest of my life trying to atone for them. Her new lord cast a baffled look to Lady Rennala and received a nod. Take her, then. There has been enough death this day. And besides, she has good childbearing hips. Heat speared down the back of Tanitha's neck. It is as she says. Naruto clapped a hand to his face. Ugh, sage save me from matchmakers. There had been a small scuffle shortly in their absence. Some of the recusants tried to resist their intrusion, as was their wont. They were put down. Hard. Giza and Henricus perished under Millicent's blade and Latena's arrows, and Bernal might well have followed if not for Ria's pleading. The other denizens of the manor had likewise yielded to them without fighting. A curious fellow by the name of Patches surrendered outright. He seemed awfully eager to make himself of use. Something of a vendor, that one. His wares were useful enough. Nor was he the only one to stay out the conflict. Tanitha's knight hadn't resisted and been summarily knocked out for its rebellion. Not once. Perhaps the warrior within didn't concern themselves with such squabbles. Maybe it was only loyal to Rykard, and had believed they would perish to him. In any case, now she too, had been put down. That left one last item on Renala's agenda, one final task to be meted out. And so they set out to find the last wayward member of her family. Yes, a wayward daughter indeed. Runni stilled. She heard noise outside her rise. No. Nay. Surely not. She was imagining things. She wasn't one prone to overreactions, but the years had made her cautious, and besides, she felt she could be forgiven for this. For now that she listened, she realized her rise had gone quiet. It began with a curious stillness. Her dragon roared once, then fell silent. Her wolves snarled at this new threat, and promptly descended into a chorus of happy barks and yipping. As if they recognized this intruder. Such commotion had her scrambling off her seat and her stacked books, to peer out her window, but she was too late. She saw a flicker of dark robes. No more. She heard the telltale clank of a lever and knew the elevator was rising with it. Her heart sank in the same instant. Blade was away. Ig was watching the entrance to the manor. Soluvis was in his own rise, and nowhere near her, which meant, steepling her fingers, she cast a warding spell over the stairwell. She felt the barrier cling onto steel and stone, holding fast. There. Now they would be trapped within the spire. Someone tore right through it. How? An ugly pang of panic bleated through her mind. She was still a demigod in spirit, if not necessarily flesh at the moment. Her sorcery was of the highest caliber, potent beyond measure. No one should be able to shred her spell so. Radon was gone. Rykard was still lurking down in his manor, last she checked. Morgott ruled over the capital while Miquella and Malenia were far, far to the north. She knew Marika was trapped, and Radagon with her. So who was this, then? Mother? Nay, surely not. She'd gone mad. When did I last check up on her? But there was no time for further thought. Runni could hear footsteps approaching even now. She raced back to her chair and plunked down upon her covered books, determined to at least appear taller than she was. She called her darkest sorceries to her, ready to fling them at whomever stepped through that door. So be it, then. If her last line of defense had fallen, then she would defend herself. They would not find her lacking. She was Runni the witch. She was, oh dear, because that was no tarnished coming through her door. Runni balked, and her spells slipped from her grasp, rocketing forward. The newcomer raised their staff and her sorcery sizzled out. Mother? It was but a whisper, little more than a startled rasp, but she heard it all the same. Sharp eyes cut to her. Blast! Still. Be still. She must be still. Maybe if she remained seated, she would think her a doll. There was another with her now, a man in tattered armor, bearing 4 great runes, one upon his chest, 2 to his shoulders and another carved into his neck, yet she barely had time to notice these. Why, you ask? Mother was upon her. I know thy voice, she hummed, if not necessarily thy form. Speak. 2 fingers flitted out, pinching her cheek, her voice the lowest of hums. Art thou an impostor? If so, I shall strike thee down. She would, too. In her current state, Runni, she knew herself no match for her. She tried not to whimper. Really, she failed within 3 seconds. No, 'tis I, mother. Renala made a strangled sound. Another hand came up, cupping her face with infinite tenderness. How is this possible? She didn't give her the chance to answer. Strong arms hauled her into a warm embrace, holding tight. Runni didn't move. She absolutely did not dare. Even when mother began to weep, she didn't dare make a solitary sound. Sentiment and shock warred within her, shredding any semblance of plotting or planning. She could only sit there, stunned, as mother fussed over her, and pray she wouldn't find reason to be angry at her. Because she, of all people, had every reason. And if she remembered that, all at once Renala drew back, holding her at arm's length. How are you here, my daughter? You died. I saw your corpse. Runni's mind fizzled. In a panic, she said the first thing that came to mind. My death was greatly exaggerated. It was the wrong thing to say. I see. Renala hummed softly, eyes going half-lidded. Is that so? Is that all you have to say for thy part in this madness? Her grip tightened. For all the sorrow and pain you caused me, and this world. Numbed by shock, Runni's tongue betrayed her. Yes, fool. She'd all but thrust her foot in her mouth. The blonde behind Mother sighed. You shouldn't ha did that. Runni scowled at him, recognizing the arrogant oaf. Did what? Why have you brought my mother here, tarnished? Speak. Naruto shook his head slowly. Mother blurred. In an instant Runni found herself yanked forward and draped over her mother's knee. A hand swept forth, parted her robes, arched her back. 'Twas a position she'd not been held in since she was a little girl, a punishment most familiar. Her face darkened in sudden shame. No. Surely she wouldn't. Not here. Not in front of the tarnished. She looked up and found Mother's face carved from stone. Thou hast chosen poorly. Runni balked, her good eye widening. Mama, no. Mama, yes. Whap! Her entire body jolted as an open palm collided with her hindquarters. From a physical standpoint, puppet body could not feel anything. No. Nay. Not a thing. Her soul was another matter. Mother was a mistress of magic, she knew spells that were unknown even to the gods. 'Twas she who had beat back Radagon himself, forcing him to win by love what an army could not through war. In short, Runni's spirit felt every blow as if she were flesh. Whap! Stop! She squirmed, to no avail. Cease this at once. Whap! Another hand hit her flank, drawing a yelp from her. Whap! Mother, please! Renala wound up for another smack. Whap! Runni whimpered like the child she no longer was. There was only one thing for it. I'm sorry. That's it for part 5. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.